They called her the slave of 73 scars. But those who truly knew her, those who worked beside her in the sweltering Carolina fields, those who watched her walk with an unbreakable spine even when her back bled, knew better. They called her Sarah of the Iron Will. Her scars were not marks of defeat. They were a ledger. Every raised line along her skin was a record of injustice, a name, a face, a moment, a reminder of each person who thought a lash could bend her spirit. And yet she walked tall. Plantation folk whispered about her after sundown. Overseers pretended not to notice the way conversations stopped when she stepped into a room. Even the master, who prided himself on never fearing anything that walked on two legs, felt something shift in the air when she looked at him. There was something dangerous in her stillness. Something old. Something that no chain could smother. Some said it came from her grandmother, who had come from a distant village across an ocean, bringing with her the fierce belief that a person cannot be owned. Others said Sarah had simply been born with a spine carved from fire. Whatever the truth, by the time her 73rd scar healed, everyone on the plantation knew one thing. Sarah's spirit had outlived her suffering, and the plantation itself trembled under the weight of that realization. This story begins on the day something inside her shifted forever. The day the 73rd scar was placed, and the day she decided that no one would ever place a 74th. Dawn had not yet broken when Sarah rose from the thin cot in the slave quarters. The air was cool enough to raise bumps across her arms, but she barely noticed. She had not noticed cold, heat, or hunger for years, not in the way most people did. Pain had become something else to her, something she had learned to fold, compress, and store deep within her ribs like a hidden fire. The others stirred as she stood. A few murmured gentle greetings, cautious nods. To many of them, Sarah was something of a protector. She never spoke of herself that way, but she always noticed who limped, who worked with a quiet wince, who needed an extra hand with a bundle of cane or a child on their hip. This morning, though, she did not move with her usual steady calm. There was a stiffness in her right shoulder, a reminder of yesterday's blow. A faint welt ran diagonally across her back, where the overseer had corrected her for working too slowly. She had not worked slowly. She had simply paused to help an older woman who had tripped in the field. The overseer did not appreciate compassion. Compassion, to him, looked like defiance. Sarah stepped outside, breathing in the damp morning air. The sky was purple at the edges, the world quiet enough to hear the distant bell that would soon call them to the fields. As she walked toward the water barrel, she overheard hushed whispers behind her. She ain't gonna keep taking it. Taken? She done survived more than most. One day she gone snap though, mark me. Sarah did not turn. She had heard versions of that whisper for years, but today, something about it felt heavier, as if the air itself had joined the conversation. When the work bell rang, she moved with the others toward the fields. Rows of sugarcane stretched before them, tall and sharp-edged, glistening with morning dew. The overseer, Harlan, leaned on his post with the swagger of a man who believed authority was the same thing as strength. His hand rested lazily on the whip coiled at his belt. He watched Sarah with the same calculating stare he always used, but today, there was something smug in it. "Sarah," he called, voice loud enough to echo across the field. "Come here." A hush fell over the workers. She stepped forward, jaw tight, but eyes steady. Harlan circled her, as if inspecting a mule. "You slow yesterday." "I helped Miss Ruth," she answered without fear. Harlan didn't like directness. He liked flinching. He liked trembling. Sarah did neither. He leaned close enough for her to smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "You think you run things here? Think you some kind of leader?" "No," she said calmly. "I think I'm human." The whisper that rippled through the workers was quick, almost invisible, but Harlan felt it. His face darkened. "That's your problem," he hissed. "You forget your place." He raised his whip, and Sarah did something she had never done before. She stepped back, not in fear, in refusal. Harlan froze. The field froze. Even the air seemed to pause. "You don't step away from me," he growled. But the lash still came down. A quick slash, a practiced motion, striking across her shoulder. Sarah inhaled sharply but did not cry out. Harlan waited for her to break. She didn't move. "That's number 73. he sneered, stepping back proudly. Sarah straightened slowly, dignity radiating from her like heat from a furnace. She turned her head not far, not enough to be called Defiance in words, but just enough for Harlan to see her eyes. And in her eyes he found something he had never seen before. Not pain, not fear, not submission. Something colder, something older, something final. It chilled him more than any scream ever could. Sarah said nothing, but everyone who saw her that morning would later swear. That was the moment the plantation's fate was sealed. The morning after the master's blood soaked into the red dirt, the plantation woke in a silence so thick it felt like a shroud. No rooster crowed, no overseer barked orders. The cabins did not stir with the usual resignation of another day under the lash. Instead, a slow, reverent murmuring spread from door to door, from field to shed, from the sugar house to the quarters at the far edge of the property. They whispered one name, Sarah. She stood in the yard where she had killed him, her body still and tall despite the bruises blooming beneath the skin, despite the agony singing through her bones. The rusted chain she had used lay coiled at her feet, stained dark. The whipping post behind her, once the plantation's altar of cruelty, leaned broken, snapped at its roots like a dead tree. And still she did not speak. Some said the silence was mourning. Some said it was fear. But those closest to her knew better. She was remembering. Jonas, the old field hand who had watched Sarah grow from a small, sharp-eyed girl into a woman carved from iron, stepped cautiously toward her. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. "Child, you gotta rest." Sarah turned slightly, her gaze distant and hollow. "Not yet." Her voice scraped like gravel, quiet, but unshakably firm. Jonas swallowed. "It's over. You did what you had to." Sarah lifted her shirt just enough to expose the first of her scars, jagged, raised lines. Some faded into soft silver, others newer and still dark. They covered her torso like a map of battles survived. "It ain't over," she said. "Not till I count." Jonas stared. "Count what?" She touched the first scar. "What he gave me." For years she had endured the lash, the rope, the salt rubbed into open wounds. Every cruelty he devised, every punishment he invented, every agony he inflicted, her body had catalogued all of it. But she had never spoken of them, never cried about them, never acknowledged them. Until now, a small group gathered: Marlene the cook, young Ruth with her thin hands clasped tight, Isaiah who limped from his own beatings. They watched Sarah press her fingers gently to the scar over her ribs. "One," she whispered, then the long one across her back. 2, another across her stomach. 3. By 10, Marlene was crying openly. By 20, Isaiah had fallen to his knees. By 40, the overseers hiding in the big house were trembling behind boarded windows, hearing the numbers echo across the yard as if judgment itself had come calling. Sarah did not stop. Her voice never rose. It remained low, steady, almost ceremonial. Each number was a ledger entry, a testimony, a reclamation. When she reached 50, she paused. The wind stirred. The broken whipping post creaked. Jonas tried again. "Child, that's enough." Sarah's eyes had changed clearer now, sharper, as though the counting was cleansing something inside her. "No," she said. "He made sure I remembered every one. I aim to finish." She continued. 51, 52, 53. The scars were not just wounds, they were the history of the plantation itself, written in flesh. Every strike of the lash echoed the rules of the master's tyranny. Break the body to command the mind, tear the skin to carve obedience. But something he never understood, something Sarah now embodied, was that skin could heal, and what healed became stronger. When Sarah reached 70, she faltered for the first time. Not from pain, but from the weight of memory. Her knees softened. Jonas reached forward, but she raised her hand to stop him. "I can stand," she murmured. The last 3 scars were the deepest slashes he had given her just months before her uprising, when he believed breaking her spirit would secure his dominance forever. She touched the 71st scar, 71, the 72nd, 72, and finally, the one carved into the back of her shoulder, the one that had laid her in the dirt for hours, leaving her half-conscious and near dead. But it had also been the one that taught her something crucial. Pain ends. Rage does not. She lifted her head as her fingers brushed the final scar. 73. The whisper echoed like thunder across the plantation. Then came silence. No birds. No voices. Not even wind. Sarah straightened fully, shoulders back, chin high. The scars had been counted. The past had been spoken into the open. She had given her suffering a number, a shape, a truth. Now it belonged to her, not to him. Marlene stepped forward, voice cracking. "Sarah, what now?" Sarah stared at the broken whipping post, then down at the rusted chain she had used to kill the master. Her expression hardened into something fierce, righteous, and unstoppable. "Now," she said, "we decide what becomes of this place." Her scars had been counted, but the reckoning had only begun. The spring rains came early that year, turning the Georgia earth into sucking mud, thick and red as blood. The plantation fields drowned in it. Wagons sank, mules slipped, overseers cursed at the sky. But Sarah moved through it like she'd been born from the soil itself, quiet, deliberate, leaving no print that wasn't meant to be seen. Word had begun to spread, not openly, not in shouts, but in sideways glances, in the way the slave quarters fell silent whenever an overseer passed, in the way even the roughest field hands kept their eyes on Sarah's back the way they might watch a gathering storm. Because 3 posts were gone, 3 thick oak whipping posts, everyone older than the overseers who used them, everyone soaked with layers of pain reduced to splinters, one after another. At dawn, as if the earth simply swallowed them, the masters whispered sabotage. The slaves whispered something else. "She's counting." Sarah said nothing. She only watched. Tonight, she knew, the 4th post would fall, but not by her hand. It started in the women's quarter, where the walls kept nothing. The thin boards were too old, too warped, too soft to hold secrets. A girl named Maddie, no more than 15, had been taken behind the cookhouse earlier that evening for correction. The correction had lasted 27 minutes. Everyone counted. Everyone always counted. Maddie returned, unable to stand straight. Her sobbing was thin and breathless, as if fear had already wrapped itself around her lungs. Her dress hung off one shoulder. Her cheek was bleeding. Sarah saw her from the doorway, saw the trembling, and saw the other women looking anywhere but at her. Not uncaring, just crushed, too used to it, too afraid. Sarah knelt in front of Maddie. "Who?" she asked quietly. Maddie shook her head, terrified. Don't ask me. Please don't." Sarah reached out and touched her wrist, gently, delicate as a whisper. "I ain't asking for me," she said. "I'm asking for number 9. Maddie blinked through tears. "9? Sarah nodded. "There were 73 scars cut into me," she murmured. 73 cuts they thought would break me. Didn't. I counted every one. Her fingers brushed her own arms, her back. The place's pain had lived so long it had become a second skin. "I'm taking 73 things from them," Sarah said. One by one. She wiped the blood from Maddie's cheek with her thumb. "Post number 4 going down tonight. But 9. Her voice dropped into a low, powerful hum. "9 ain't wood." Maddie finally understood. "It was Hammond," she whispered. "Overseer Hammond." Sarah closed her eyes once, not in sadness, in decision. That night, the sky was moonless, a thick black velvet that swallowed lamps and torches whole. The wind picking up through the pecan grove sounded like something restless, hungry. Perfect. Sarah walked silently toward the clearing by the barn, the largest of the whipping posts leaning like a crooked tooth beside the fence, the same one they had dragged her to for 6 consecutive days when she was 17. The same one where she had bitten her own lip bloody rather than scream. The same one where her 73rd scar had been carved. She laid her hand on the post. "I remember you," she whispered. "And every hand that ever held a whip against you." Footsteps approached. Hammond. He always walked like he owned the ground, like the mud should thank him for being stepped on. He had a limp from an old bullet wound. He blamed the war, though the slaves knew the truth. He'd shot himself drunk, misfiring at a shadow. Tonight, the limp was louder than usual. He muttered to himself, kicking at the dirt. Damn curses, damn slaves, damn posts. breaking like matchsticks. He stopped when he saw her body standing in the dark. "You." His voice cracked into a sneer. "You got business being out this late?" Sarah didn't move. Hammond reached for the pistol at his hip. "You hear me?" Sarah let her head lift slowly. "I hear you," she said. He snorted. "Good. 'Cause I'm thinking you know something about these posts. Or maybe you're the one." He didn't finish, because he finally noticed something he should have seen sooner. She wasn't alone. Shapes moved behind her. Dozens. Silent as fog. Men, women, children old enough to work but young enough to still hope. All of them stepping into the clearing one by one, forming a ring around the post, around Hammond, around Justice. Hammond's hand trembled on his pistol. Hold on now." Sarah turned to the crowd and spoke in a single, clear voice. "This ain't my revenge tonight. It's ours." Hammond drew the pistol, but the slaves closed in before he could raise it. They didn't kill him. Not yet. They dragged him screaming to the whipping post, bound him to it, exposed his back, and handed Sarah something, a rusted chain link. She lifted it, held it against Hammond's shoulder. "You hurt a child today," she said. "That's 9. The crowd murmured an echo, a vow, a promise. Sarah brought the chain down, once, twice, again. With every strike, the post behind Hammond cracked, crumbled, split like rotten bark, until both the overseer and the post collapsed together into the mud. The slaves stepped back, breathing hard, trembling, alive with something they'd forgotten the shape of. Power. The 4th post was gone, and Hammond, broken, bleeding, unconscious, was dragged into the dark. Sarah stood alone for a moment, touching the splintered stump. 9 down, she whispered. 64 to go. The sky over Hollow Bend had turned the color of bruised flesh, purple, swollen, heavy. A storm gathered somewhere beyond the pines, but the air on the plantation was still, too still. It felt as if even the wind held its breath. Every animal in the fields had gone quiet. The dogs, usually restless after dusk, lay curled beneath the porch, tails tucked, sensing something humans could not name. Sarah walked slowly across the yard, her bare feet silent on the packed dirt. Around her ankles hung the broken remains of the iron fetters she'd shattered 2 hours earlier. They dragged behind her like dead serpents. Every step left a curved trace, part footprint, part warning. The 73rd scar burned beneath her shirt, still raw, still leaking down her side. But there was no pain. Not tonight. Pain had been hammered out of her long ago. What remained was something colder, cleaner, stripped of fear and trembling. A decision that had grown roots inside her. She headed toward the punishment yard. The whipping post stood in a crooked row near the cornfield, pale in the moonlight, old, splintered, each one stained with the history of bodies stretched against them. They loomed like rotten teeth in the earth. A breeze finally rolled in, brushing her face as if trying to stop her, but she kept walking. Her fingers tightened around the rusted chain she had hidden in the smokehouse rafters for 4 years. She'd stolen it, link by link, whenever she was sent to fetch tools, wrapping the pieces in rags, building it like a secret spine. Tonight, she held it whole for the first time, and she intended to use it. But first, the posts. The first one was crooked, leaning as though exhausted by how many backs it had held. Sarah stepped close. The wood smelled of sun and old blood. She reached out, placed her palm on the center groove, the exact place where she herself had been tied for the 30-second scar. Her silence was not prayer. It was memory sharpening itself. Then she lifted the chain. With a snap of her shoulders, Sarah swung the length of rusted iron in a wide arc. It struck the post so hard the crack echoed across the yard. Birds exploded from the nearby trees. The post trembled, split along the old knot, and toppled forward into the dirt. 1. She moved to the second post, breath calm, eyes steady. She swung again. Wood shattered. Splinters lit the air like sparks. 2. By the third, her heartbeat had synced with the rhythm of destruction. Each swing was a blow against every scream she had swallowed, against every order to hold still, against every lash that had written itself into her skin like a curse. When the 5th post fell, she paused, panting, sweat streaking her jawline. She was shaking, not from fear, but from a release she had never allowed herself before. It felt like air after drowning. The clouds shifted, revealing a sliver of moon. In its pale glow, she looked at the final post, the one she had been tied to last night, where the 73rd scar had been carved, where her flesh had opened and the master's laughter had cut deeper than the whip. Her grip on the chain tightened until the rust bit her palms. The world narrowed to that post, to the memory of being dragged across the yard, to the sound of the whip slicing air. "No more," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken since the whipping. She swung the chain. This time, she did not stop after the first strike, or the second, or the 9th. She beat the post until it finally exploded apart, splinters flying like arrows, dust rising like smoke, the earth swallowing the last piece of it. Sarah fell to her knees, not broken, but emptied in a way that made space for something new, something dangerous. The silence afterward felt like the pause before thunder. The storm had not yet broken overhead, but it was coming. Her breath steadied, her heartbeat slowed. She looked toward the master's house. Only one thing remained. The man who had made all 73 scars. She stood, lifting the chain. The first raindrop touched her cheek. "Time," she murmured. And with the storm rising behind her, Sarah walked toward the house, toward the final debt waiting to be settled. The storm had been brewing long before thunder cracked across the plantation, long before the clouds rolled over the cane fields like a heavy, sullen army. Sarah felt it in the ribs the overseer had broken the previous winter. She felt it in the raised webs of scar tissue across her back, tugging tight as if the past itself had hands. She felt it in the heat that spread through her jaw every time Master Calder's voice carried across the yard like a whip of its own. But tonight, something else stirred. The wind that pushed through the slave quarters was different, quieter, purposeful, almost listening. Children sensed it first. They stopped crying, stopped fidgeting, and stared at the door. The elders fell into the kind of silence only people who've buried too much can recognize. Every face turned toward Sarah, because they knew. When someone suffers beyond what a body is meant to hold, when pain becomes a number so large it can't be counted, only felt it changes something in the air. Sarah stood in the far corner of the quarter, tying rough cloth around her palms. Her eyes narrowed like a hunter waiting for a sign she already knew was coming. Tonight she wasn't planning revenge. Tonight she was planning justice. Her breathing was calm, almost too calm for someone about to do something that would get her killed before sunrise. But death was not a threat to a woman who'd already felt the world strip everything from her except the part that refused to die. Outside, rain hammered the earth, turning the yard into a slick sheet of mud. Lanterns flickered under the whipping post, the same post that had held her body down for 37 whippings all counted, every lash carved into her skin like tally marks of cruelty. Sarah had avoided looking at that post for years, but tonight she stared directly at it, as if daring it to remember her. "Sarah," whispered old Mabel, voice trembling, "whatever you thinkin', don't. Chill. They gon' torture you till you beg the grave to come quick." Sarah didn't turn. "I done begged the grave," she said. It never answered. She stepped into the rain. Lightning split the sky, white. Across the yard, the overseer Macklin stumbled from the barn, shouting something drunken and unintelligible. His boots sank ankle-deep in the mud as he lurched toward the whipping post, unaware that the storm behind him was not the one in the sky. Sarah's footsteps made no sound. Macklin wiped rain from his eyes but saw nothing. The storm swallowed sound, swallowed shape. The shadows did the rest. Sarah reached him from behind. Her hand clamped over his mouth before he could even gasp. His body stiffened, then trembled as she whispered directly into his ear. "You gave me 18 of my 73 scars." He froze. Lightning flashed again, and this time he saw her. Her eyes were not angry. They were worse than angry. They were calm, steady, decided. "Please," he choked. Sarah dragged him toward the post, the same way he had dragged her those 18 times. His boots scraped the mud. The rain hid her strength, or perhaps revealed it because Macklin was heavy, but Sarah pulled him as if he were a sack of wet cotton. She slammed him against the post. Thunder swallowed his scream. "You like tying folks down," she said. Let me show you how it feels." She grabbed the rope he had used for years on others and wrapped it around his wrists with expert precision, tight, unyielding. It was the rope of a man who had practiced cruelty. In her hands, it became the rope of a woman who had learned to survive it. Macklin begged, voice cracking like dry wood. Sarah didn't listen. Instead, she turned her attention to the post itself, the tall beam that had held hundreds of backs, soaked hundreds of skins with blood and sweat. She examined it like a carpenter, tracing the cracks near its base, feeling where the rot had started creeping in. "You old," she muttered to it, "weak, just like the man who feeds off you." Then she wrapped both arms around the base of the post. Her muscles tightened. Her feet dug into the mud. Her breath hissed between her teeth, and she pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then a groan, a long, deep groan from within the wood, as if the post remembered every scream it had caused and was finally ready to give way. Sarah pulled harder. Her scars burned, a fire running across her skin. The post cracked. Macklin shrieked as his body lurched with the sudden movement. He kicked, twisted, fought like a trapped hog. Sarah didn't look at him. She pulled again, this time with everything she had ever lost. The post snapped. It hit the ground with a thundering crash, dragging Macklin with it. The sound echoed across the entire plantation. Lanterns lit. Doors opened. Voices shouted, but it was too late. Sarah stood over the fallen post, rain soaking her hair, thunder splitting the sky behind her like a crown of light. She looked less like a slave and more like an omen of something unstoppable. The overseer writhed in the mud beneath the broken symbol of his power. Sarah knelt. "For scar number 41, she whispered, and struck him with her fist. "For 42, another blow. For every one you gave me." Her voice was steady. Her hands were merciless, and the storm didn't stop her. It fueled her. By the time she stood again, Macklin lay unconscious, blood mixing with muddy rainwater. The broken post lay beside him like a fallen tyrant. Sarah wiped the water from her face. She felt no triumph, only beginning. Because the post was not the end. It was the start of everything she planned next. The moon rose, swollen and red, hanging over the plantation like a lid over boiling water. It was the same moon Sarah had stared at every night she spent tied to the whipping post. But tonight, she faced it unbound, unbroken, unstoppable. Her 73 scars glistened like a map of vengeance drawn on her back by cruel hands. Each welt remembered a name, a date, a voice that had laughed while she bled. Tonight she answered them. The men gathered inside the overseer's shed thought they were safe drinking, gambling, and bragging about who had whipped Sarah the hardest. They didn't know she'd slipped from her cabin, that she'd stolen the chain from the butcher's stall, that she'd wrapped it twice around her forearm until metal and bone felt like one. But they would know soon. She walked to the yard where all 3 whipping posts stood in a hateful row. The sight of them made her heart seize, then harden. The posts were thick pine trunks, roots buried deep, stained dark from decades of blood and water. Wind rustled through the grass, whispering her name the way the enslaved did when they wanted someone to survive just a little longer. Sarah placed her hand against the first post. It trembled, not because it was alive, but because she made it so. Her breath heaved, her muscles knotted like cables. She wrapped the chain around the wood, dug her heels into the earth, and pulled with every memory of every lash ever laid upon her skin. The post cracked. The plantation dogs snapped awake in their kennels, whining at a sound they didn't know wood screaming. Sarah pulled again, a guttural roar ripping from her throat, raw and primal enough to shake dust from the rafters. The first post toppled. It hit the ground with a thunderous thud that rolled across the plantation like a drum announcing war. Inside the overseer's shed, the men paused mid-laugh. Someone muttered, "What in hell was that?" Sarah didn't wait for them to investigate. She moved to the second post, planted her feet, wound the chain again. This one broke faster, almost eager, as if the wood itself wanted to be freed of its cruelty. The ground shook, lanterns inside the shed rattled, dice fell, cards scattered. The men exchanged nervous glances. Sarah marched to the third post, the one that had broken her ribs, the one she had fainted against twice, the one her master himself favored when he wanted to correct her spirit. She stood before it, chest heaving, eyes burning. "You took my voice," she whispered to it, though the post could not hear. "But you gon' hear me tonight." She wrapped the chain once, twice, a third time. She pulled. Her muscles tore. Her shoulder screamed. Her knees shook. And then, crack! The third post shattered so loudly the birds sleeping in the oaks exploded into the air in a frenzy. It split down the middle like a rib cage pried open by invisible hands. The overseers finally spilled outside. "What the hell? Who's out there?" "Someone check the yard." Sarah didn't hide. She stepped into the torchlight, chain hanging like a serpent from her fist, scars gleaming like war paint. One of the men saw her and gasped. "Jesus Christ, she's loose." Another stumbled back. Her back. Look at her back. One pointed at the fallen posts. "She did that." Sarah's voice came out low and ragged from years of being silenced. "No," she said. "Y'all did." "F." The men hesitated. They weren't frightened of slaves, they'd killed plenty. But they'd never seen one stand like this, bare scars shining beneath firelight like the marks of a resurrected soldier. The biggest overseer, Harlan, recovered first. He spat tobacco, drew his pistol, and sneered. "Girl, you better drop that chain before I drop you." Sarah tilted her head. "Come try," Harlan fired. Sarah moved before the flash even faded, swinging the chain so fast it whistled through the air. Metal collided with his wrist bone, snapped backward, his gun flew into the darkness as he howled. Another man lunged at her with a knife. The chain wrapped his ankle, yanked, and he fell so hard his teeth cracked on the dirt. They came together after that, panicked, stumbling, shouting orders none of them followed. Sarah fought like she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment because she had. Every blow she landed was one she'd carried inside her since childhood. Every strike was an answer to every lash. One man rushed her from behind. She whipped the chain over her shoulder, caught his jaw jerked. He hit the ground like a felled ox. Another reached for her arm. She twisted, hooked the chain around his neck, and pulled him into the dirt until his kicks slowed. Harlan whimpered where he knelt, clutching his ruined wrist. "Demon," he spat. "Ain't human." Sarah stepped toward him. His words stopped. His breath stopped. Everything stopped. She didn't have to strike him. He broke on his own. When she finally stood alone in the yard, the night was silent, except for her breath and the soft creak of the fallen posts behind her. She looked at the chain, the splinters, the men she'd left groaning or still. For the first time in her life, the plantation belonged to her, even if only for the length of a heartbeat. She lifted her face to the moon and whispered, "One down, the rest are comin'." The wind carried her promise like a warning, and far away, inside the big house, the master stirred in his sleep, as if he felt the ground shifting beneath him, and it was. The night air pressed thick against Sarah's skin, humid and heavy like a hand trying to smother a flame. But Sarah was long past smothering. She was the flame. And the scars across her back, 73 ridges of healed brutality, were burning again, humming like struck iron, guiding her somewhere she had never dared go. She stood in the pine brake behind the quarters, barefoot, listening. The frogs had gone silent. The cicadas, too. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The plantation was waiting for something, and that something was her. For weeks, she had moved like a shadow, silent, careful, untraceable as she dismantled every point of power the master relied on. She broke the posts, shattered the stocks, burned the chains. She took away the overseer's horses, poisoned their hounds, snapped the gears on the cotton press so the master would lose every dollar he hoped to squeeze from her people. She had not killed. Not yet. But she had made him bleed fear. Tonight she intended to finish what she began. She traced the scar along her right shoulder, one of the thickest, a raised line of flesh curling like a river. It led downward, meeting the others like tributaries. A map. That was what old Rhea, the midwife, had called them after Sarah escaped from the whipping shed weeks ago. "These scars don't mark where you've been hurt," old Rhea whispered as she traced them with trembling fingers. "They mark where you gon' walk next." Sarah didn't believe her then. But over the last nights, she had felt pulled, led toward the same place again and again. The pine brake, the ravine, the old collapsed smokehouse from the slave quarters before the master rebuilt everything to proper standards. A place the master forgot, but the land remembered. Tonight she followed the pull again. She crouched low, moving through ferns, her breath shallow, every sense sharpened. Behind her, the slave quarters were quiet, the people asleep but restless, stirred by the shifting air. Their fear traveled through the roots beneath her feet. Their hope traveled too. When she reached the ruins of the smokehouse, the moon slid free of a cloud, lighting the collapsed stone and overgrown timbers. The scars across her back tingled, pulling her forward until she stood before a half-buried iron ring sticking out of the earth. The master's father used that ring to chain people, to break them. Sarah's stomach tightened. She could almost hear the cries still caught in the soil. But she had come for something else. She knelt and scraped away dirt until her fingers hit something solid, cool, metallic, shaped like a jaw. She dug faster. The buried object rose piece by piece from the ground. A rusted iron chain collar, broken in one place as if snapped by brute force. Old Ria's words rang in her skull. The land remember who fought back. Sarah lifted the collar, heavy and cold, and in that moment the world seemed to shift. A gust swept through the trees. The moon brightened. Her scars throbbed like they were alive. She wasn't holding a relic. She was holding a weapon, a promise, a piece of vengeance older than her own pain. Slowly, she draped the chain around her shoulders. It weighed more than iron should, like it carried the fury of everyone who had ever been trapped inside it. Something cracked behind her. She spun, chain ready. A man stepped from the trees, Elias. The quiet, watchful slave who had followed her these past nights in secret. He was breathing hard, covered in sweat and dust. "Sarah," he whispered. "He know, the master know you plannin' something tonight." She didn't speak. "He comin'," Elias said, voice shaking. "He comin' with 3 overseers. They lookin' to drag you to the shed again, finish what he started." Sarah rose slowly. Her eyes hardened, the chain glinting like a serpent across her back. "No," she said, voice steady. "Tonight he finish nothin'." Elias stepped closer, torn between terror and awe. "What you gon' do?" Sarah lifted the rusted iron collar higher, gripping it like a war club. "I'm gon' make sure he never hurts another soul." The trees shuddered as footsteps echoed through the night, multiple, heavy, careless. Men who believed themselves hunters. Sarah smiled, a scarred, dangerous smile. "They think they know what pain is," she whispered. Then she turned toward the sound of the coming men. "And tonight, they gon' learn." The moon rose, swollen and yellow, its light pouring over the plantation like a bruise spreading across the sky. The night insects had fallen silent hours ago, as if they sensed what Sarah was preparing to do, what the earth itself trembled for, what every unseen ancestor held its breath to witness. Sarah stood at the edge of the field, shoulders scarred, back burning, hands wrapped in strips of cloth she had ripped from her own skirts. The rusted chain coiled around her arm like a living thing, heavy, cold, but humming as if aware of its purpose. She lifted it once, feeling the metal kiss her skin, biting into the marks already there. 73 scars. And tonight, she promised, there would be one more. The final scar, carved not into her body but into history itself. Behind her, the others gathered. Some trembled with fear, some with hope, some with both, but all waited on her signal. Because tonight was not merely rebellion, it was the debt of suffering finally called due. Master Howell's house glowed at the top of the hill, lanterns burning in the parlor like eyes watching the land he believed he owned. Inside, laughter drifted out. He was celebrating her punishment, celebrating the whip, celebrating 73 carved lines on a woman who refused to bend. "He thinks I'm broken," Sarah thought. "He thinks he has pieces of me to command." She smiled. He did not know what those scars had turned her into. She lifted the chain high. The signal. A hush rippled through the night, and then, without a word, the enslaved moved. 2 men slipped toward the stable to silence the horses. 3 women headed for the overseer's shack, where he slept with a bottle on his chest. And Sarah walked straight toward the main house. Every step felt like a drumbeat, every breath a vow, every heartbeat another lash she meant to return. Inside, Howell shouted drunkenly at someone. Glass shattered. A woman screamed a housegirl he had struck, no doubt. Howell was always happiest when someone else was bleeding. Sarah reached the door. She lifted the chain and swung. Wood exploded inward. Howell's laughter snapped short. 2. Ascendiza. Ascendiza. He turned, eyes wide, fists still full of liquor and arrogance. You, he growled. You're supposed to be in the shed. Sarah stepped inside. The lantern light spilled across her scars, marking her like a war map. I was, she said softly. But I remembered something. And what's that? He spat. That everything you've done to me, everything you took, everything you split and burned and carved. She raised the chain. Was training. Howell lunged for his pistol, but Sarah moved first. The chain snapped through the air with a sound like the sky tearing. It struck his wrist, bone cracking as he screamed and fell sideways. He reached for the whip on the table. Sarah laughed. You think that still scares me? She swung again. The chain wrapped around his arm, ripping flesh as she yanked him forward. He stumbled, falling to his knees, shouting for the overseers. They won't answer, Sarah said. Not tonight. Howell's face twisted with realization. You planned this. I didn't plan it, she corrected. You did. Every time you beat me. Every time you made me bleed. Every time you counted the cuts. And, she stepped closer, you carved your own death 73 times. Howell crawled backward, hands slipping in spilled whiskey and his own blood. Mercy, he gasped. Sarah wrapped the chain around her fists. You never learned that word. Before he could speak again, she swung. Once, twice, 3 times. The chain slammed into him with the sound of iron meeting rotten wood. He collapsed, gasping, choking, the life draining from him like water from a cracked jug. He looked up at her, eyes glassy, lips trembling. Sarah, please. She knelt beside him, lifting his head gently, almost tenderly, so he could see her clearly. You made me a woman of scars, she whispered. I'm giving everyone back. And she did, until the man who believed himself untouchable lay broken beneath the same rusted chain he had once used to shackle others. Outside, the others waited listening. When Sarah stepped onto the porch, her chain stained red. The night wind stirred as if bowing. The enslaved stared at her, breathing in the sight of a woman who had killed her master with the very symbol of their bondage. Is it done? Someone whispered. Sarah nodded, and the plantation exhaled for the first time in its existence. Then tonight, she said quietly, we bury him, and we rise. The chain clanked at her side, no longer a weapon. Now it was the key to every locked door. By the winter of 1844, the plantations along the Yazoo Bend spoke her name only in whispers, never aloud, never after sundown. Sarah of the 73 scars. Some claimed she was dead. Others swore she still walked the riverbank before dawn, her rusted chain dragging behind her in the cane grass. What no one admitted openly was the truth. Sarah lived, and she was free. She did not flee to the north, nor vanish into the swamps like others who escaped. Sarah chose something bolder, something unimaginable to those who thought they owned her. She stayed, not on the plantation it burned down the same night she wrapped that rusted chain around Master Latham's throat, but in the land between wilderness and civilization, a place with no name on any map, a place where patrols never lingered long. She built a cabin with her own hands. She fished the river. She trapped her own food. She spoke to no one unless she wished to. Every scar on her back, her ribs, her arms, she used them as a ledger, a record, a vow she had fulfilled. The world had done its worst, and still she breathed. The slave catchers who went looking for her returned with trembling hands, claiming they heard metal dragging in the brush behind them. One man swore he saw her silhouette by the cypress trees at dusk. She walks with that chain, he said, voice breaking, like she ain't done using it. Whether the tale was truth or fear hardly mattered. By spring, no patrol rode within 4 miles of the old Latham property. The other plantations stopped sending hunters after runaways in that direction too. They believed Sarah guarded those woods like a spirit of vengeance, and nobody wished to test her mercy. Every so often, a runaway would stumble upon her dwelling, starved, bleeding, hunted. Sarah took them in without question, fed them, tended their wounds, gave them directions deeper into the wilderness where the marsh swallowed tracks. Before they left, she always said the same thing, her voice quiet but unwavering. Is greater than, you don't owe me your life, you owe them your absence. And the runaways would vanish like smoke toward the secret channels, the tribes who sheltered the fleeing, the river routes no white patrol had ever fully mapped. Sarah never went with them. Freedom tasted different to her. She wanted distance, not escape. Years passed. The old Latham plantation became tangled ruins swallowed by vines, its fields reclaimed by wild cane and fox dens. Travelers who wandered too close claimed they found the rusted chain, wrapped around a charred beam of the old whipping post. Some said she left it there intentionally, a gravestone for the woman she had once been, a warning for any man who thought pain could crush a spirit. Others whispered she still carried it, and the chain on the ruins was only bait for the foolish. Stories grew larger than the truth, but none strayed far from one simple acceptance. Sarah had not only survived, she had remade the world around her. One quiet night, as fireflies drifted between the pines, Sarah stood at the riverbank. She touched the oldest scar on her back, the one carved the first day she arrived at Latham's plantation, when she'd been beaten for refusing to lower her eyes. She traced it from shoulder to hip, then whispered, is greater than, this one stays, so I remember who I buried. Not her master, not the overseers, not the men who hunted her. No, she meant the frightened girl she used to be. That girl had died long before the killing ever began. Sarah stepped back into the woods, swallowed by shadow and moonlight, and the wilderness closed behind her like a door. No chains, no overseers, no master, only freedom, harsh, quiet, sacred, and the legend of a woman who bore 73 scars, but never carried a single one in shame.